Have you ever noticed how the loudest growth often happens in the quietest rooms? Being alone is something most people fear. But what if solitude is not your weakness, but your greatest weapon? What if the very moments you spend in silence are shaping you into someone unstoppable? Being alone is not about isolation. It's about discovery. When you are by yourself, there are no voices pulling you in different directions. That silence gives you clarity. You begin to understand who you are, what you want, and most importantly, what you refuse to settle for. When you depend on others, your strength is borrowed. But when you stand alone, your strength becomes unshakable. You learn to rely on your own abilities, your own vision, and your own discipline. That independence turns into power. Distractions fall away in solitude. While others chase approval, you build focus. While others lose themselves in the noise, you sharpen your vision in the quiet. Every great dream, every powerful breakthrough began with someone willing to walk alone before the world caught on. And yes, being alone can feel painful, but pain is a teacher. Loneliness, when embraced, turns into resilience. It toughens your mind, strengthens your heart, and builds a confidence that no crowd can give you. What once felt like emptiness becomes your foundation for growth. Sometimes you gotta step away from the noise if you really want to hear yourself. The world is loud, friends, family, social media, opinions coming from every direction. Everybody want to tell you how to move, how to think, how to dream. But when you get by yourself, when you finally sit in that silence, you start to hear the voice that matters the most, your own. That's when clarity comes in. There's a story I once heard about a man who went to the mountains to figure out his life. People thought he was crazy, like why leave everything behind just to be alone? But in that silence, he found his purpose. He came back down, and everything he touched after that turned into vision, into leadership. The truth is, sometimes distance creates direction. When you're alone, there's no mask to wear, no performance, no pressure to fit into anybody's box. You start asking yourself the real questions. What do I want? What am I willing to sacrifice? What's really important? That's the kind of clarity you can't buy, you can't fake. You can only earn it by being alone long enough to face yourself. Most people run from that. They can't handle silence because silence exposes them. It forces them to deal with the doubts, the fears, the insecurities they've been hiding. But if you stay in that moment long enough, you'll notice something. Those doubts start to fade. Those fears lose their power. You realize they were never stronger than you. They just lived loud in your head because you never gave yourself the chance to shut the world off and listen to the truth. Clarity is like cleaning a dirty window. If the glass is full of dust and fingerprints, you can't see what's outside. That's how life is when you're surrounded by too much noise. Alone time is you wiping that glass down little by little until finally you see the view clearly. You see your goals, your purpose, your direction. Think about great artists, thinkers, leaders. Before they created, they separated. They took time away, not because they hated people, but because they needed focus. They needed space to hear their own thoughts, to shape their own vision. That's why clarity is born in solitude. Now here's the part people don't understand. Clarity doesn't just show you what to do. It also shows you what not to do. It teaches you to cut off distractions, bad habits, toxic circles. It's like that old saying, if you can't spend time by yourself, you're in bad company. If you don't like your own thoughts, maybe it's time to fix what's inside. Being alone gives you that chance. I remember someone once said, when you sit with your loneliness, it becomes your teacher. That stuck with me because it's true. Loneliness ain't there to break you. It's there to show you something about yourself. And once you learn you're not lonely anymore, you're focused, you're intentional, you know why you're here. That's the kind of strength only clarity can give you. But let's move into the second part, independence. Because once you get clarity, the next step is standing on it. And that's where independence comes in. See, independence isn't just about money or status. It's about being able to move through life without needing permission, without needing somebody to validate you, without leaning so heavy on people that you can't stand without them. Most people build their life like a house leaning on weak walls. The moment those walls get pulled away, friends disappear, relationships end, support dries up, they collapse. That's why independence is so powerful. When you build your foundation on yourself, nobody can take that from you. There's a story about a young woman who started her business with nothing. No investors, no big team, no outside support. People laughed, said it wouldn't last. But because she depended on herself, she learned every part of the game: marketing, sales, building relationships. Years later, when she finally scaled, she was untouchable. She didn't owe anyone control. She didn't have to beg for help. That's the power of independence. It teaches you every corner of your grind. Independence is like building muscle. If someone's always carrying the weight for you, you never get stronger. But the moment you pick up that weight yourself, even if it feels heavy, over time you get stronger, faster, more capable. That's why relying on others too much is dangerous. It's like skipping the gym but still expecting strength. And let me drop this: the man who stands alone is never outnumbered. Think about that. If you're used to standing on your own, you're prepared for any situation. If the world turns against you tomorrow, you don't fold because you've been trained for it. But if you've always leaned on a crowd, you'll crumble the second they walk away. Independence doesn't mean you reject help or community. It means you don't need it to survive. You value it, you respect it, but you're not controlled by it. Freedom to move how you want, build how you want, and live on your own terms. Here's the thing though, independence comes with responsibility. When you decide to rely on yourself, you can't blame anyone else for your results. If you fail, it's on you. If you win, it's on you. And that's a scary truth for a lot of people, but it's also the most liberating. Because once you accept it, you realize you don't need to wait for anyone's approval. You don't need to wait for perfect timing. You don't need to wait for permission. You can start, move, build right now. A lot of people say they want freedom, but freedom ain't free. Freedom is earned through discipline, through sacrifice, through independence. You can't call yourself free if every decision depends on someone else's yes or no. And the real beauty of independence, it makes your relationship stronger. Because when you don't need someone to fill your gaps, you can choose to be around them out of love, not desperation. That's when connections are pure. Not because you're leaning on each other to survive, but because you both choose to walk together while standing tall on your own. So, solitude gives you clarity. Independence gives you strength. Put them together and you become unshakable. The quiet teaches you who you are. The grind teaches you how to stand. And the combination makes you unstoppable. One quote I always think about is this: the strongest souls are forged in solitude and tested in independence. That's the truth. When you master being alone and you master being self-reliant, nothing in this world can break you. You'll bend, you'll struggle, you'll feel pain, but you won't break. So don't fear being alone. Don't fear standing on your own. That's where your clarity and your power lie. The world may not understand it right away, but when the time comes, they'll see exactly why you chose the harder path. And that's when you'll realize it wasn't the harder path at all. It was the only path to becoming who you were meant to be. Everybody talks about wanting focus, but focus don't come easy. It's not something you can just buy, it's something you build. And the way you build it is by cutting off distractions. That's why isolation is so important. You can't sharpen your mind when you're surrounded by noise all the time. Imagine trying to write a book in the middle of a crowded room, everybody talking, music blasting, people pulling your attention every 5 seconds. You wouldn't get one page done. That's how life is when you're always around noise, opinions, energy that don't match your vision. When you isolate, you take control of your environment. You create the space where focus can live. There's a story about an athlete who used to disappear before every big competition. His teammates thought he was antisocial, like he didn't want to be around them. But what he was really doing was locking it. He knew that the only way he could perform at the highest level was by removing himself from the distractions. When the lights came on and it was time to show up, his performance spoke for itself. That wasn't magic. That was isolation creating focus. Focus is like a laser. Light by itself spreads everywhere, but a laser cuts through steel because it's concentrated. Your mind is the same way. If you spread your energy across too many people, too many conversations, too many situations, you don't have power. But when you concentrate, when you isolate yourself and put all your energy into one mission, you become unstoppable. Some people don't like being alone because they mistake it for punishment. They think, if I'm by myself, I'm missing out. But you're not missing out, you're leveling up. While they're distracted, you're building. While they're chasing attention, you're gaining focus. That's the difference between playing short-term games and building long-term empires. Let me tell you something, distractions are expensive. They cost you your time, your peace, your vision. Focus pays you back in results. That's why isolation is an investment, not a loss. You put in that quiet time now, and later you'll see the return in the way you move, the way you think, the way you build. One of the most powerful quotes I ever heard was, "You can't do big things if you're distracted by small things." That's facts, and the only way you recognize what's small is by stepping back, cutting off the noise, and seeing the bigger picture. That's what isolation gives you, the bigger picture. And once you learn how to focus, you start to realize something deeper. Loneliness isn't weakness. Loneliness is transformation. Because at first, being alone feels empty. It feels like something is missing. But if you stay in that space long enough, you find out you're not missing anything. You're building something. There was a young man who used to sit alone at lunch every day. People thought he was weird, thought nobody liked him. But what they didn't know was that he was sketching designs in his notebook the whole time. Years later, those sketches turned into a clothing line that blew up. What looked like loneliness to everyone else was really preparation. That's how loneliness transforms into power. The truth is, loneliness tests you. It makes you question yourself. It makes you face your insecurities. It's uncomfortable. But that's where growth comes from, discomfort. Diamonds don't form without pressure, and strong people don't form without loneliness. That's where resilience is born. A lot of people avoid loneliness because they think it means they're not loved or not valued. But the real value is in learning to love yourself enough to not depend on constant company. Because once you master loneliness, you stop being controlled by it. You can walk in any room, be with or without people, and still feel whole. That's real power. Think about the lion. The lion is called the king not because he's always with a pack, because he can survive on his own. He doesn't need the crowd to validate his strength. That's how loneliness should shape you. It should make you strong enough to move alone and confident enough to walk into any situation without needing backup. There's an old saying, "He who learns to walk alone will always arrive first." That's because while others are waiting for company, waiting for approval, waiting for support, the one who moves alone is already moving. That's how power is created. It's not in waiting, it's in walking. When you embrace loneliness, you also find your authenticity, because when nobody's around, there's no mask to wear, no role to play. You discover who you are without the influence of others. And once you know who you are, nobody can take that from you. That's why loneliness, once transformed, is not emptiness. It's fullness. Fullness of identity, fullness of strength, fullness of clarity. One story I like is about a farmer who planted seeds in a field. For weeks, nothing showed above the soil and people laughed at him. But underneath, roots were forming. That's how loneliness works. On the surface, it looks like nothing is happening. But underneath, your roots are growing deep. And when it's time to rise, you rise stronger than anyone expected. Loneliness also gives you endurance. When you've walked alone, when you've sat in silence, when you've dealt with your own battles, you develop a toughness that people who always had a crowd will never understand. They crumble without support. You've been forged without it. You don't crumble, you adapt, you endure, you rise. And the beauty of it all is this: once loneliness transforms into power, you stop fearing it. You stop chasing people just to feel whole. You realize that relationships, friendships, love, they're additions to your life, not the foundation. You already built your foundation in solitude. You already built your strength in loneliness. Everything else is extra. That's why isolation and loneliness, when you embrace them, don't weaken you. They sharpen you. They turn your focus into laser vision and your solitude into power. They take the parts of you that were fragile and make them unbreakable. And here's the truth. When you master focus, when you transform loneliness into strength, you become different. You stop moving like everybody else. Your steps are calculated. Your energy is protected. Your vision is unshakable. That's when you realize isolation wasn't punishment. It was preparation. Loneliness wasn't weakness. It was transformation. And everything you thought was breaking you was really building you into something greater than you imagined. So the next time you find yourself walking alone, don't see it as a weakness. See it as training. Solitude is where warriors are built, where leaders are shaped, and where strength is forged. Remember, being alone doesn't make you broken. It makes you stronger. And when your moment comes, the world will see the strength you built in silence